It was a cold and quiet Tuesday afternoon when Richard Langston stepped out of his black luxury car and helped his son Ethan out from the back seat. Richard was a man most people never expected to see in a small, ordinary place like this. He was one of the richest men in the country, a billionaire whose face appeared in business magazines, stock market reports, and financial news channels. People usually saw him in sharp suits, talking about million-dollar deals or sitting in meetings with powerful people. But here he was, wearing a simple coat and jeans, walking slowly into a small diner on a corner street. The diner was nothing special, just an old place with red booths, a few tables, the smell of frying oil, and the soft sound of old music playing in the background. But Richard wasn't here for food. He was here for something else, perhaps. Or maybe just to feel normal for a few minutes. His son Ethan was 9 years old. But his small, fragile body looked much younger. He had been born with cerebral palsy. His muscles were weak, his head often drooped to the side, and he couldn't walk or speak clearly. He was always in a wheelchair, and his communication was limited to facial expressions and small movements. Richard had spent years searching for treatments, therapists, and specialists. But nothing had brought a real change. And nothing could bring back Ethan's mother, who had died during his birth. Inside the diner, a few customers sat at their tables, sipping coffee or eating burgers. No one recognized Richard right away, which was exactly what he wanted. He rolled Ethan's wheelchair to a quiet corner near the window and sat down across from him. A menu was placed on the table, but Richard barely looked at it. His eyes were on his son. Ethan's head slowly turned toward the window. A tear rolled down his cheek. Richard's heart ached every time he saw Ethan like this. He was used to hiding his emotions in front of people. Business had taught him to be tough, to never show weakness. But when it came to Ethan, he felt helpless. He wiped the tear with a napkin and gently touched his son's hand. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence. "Hi there. Can I get you something to drink while you look at the menu?" It was a young woman, probably in her early 20s. She wore a simple apron and had her hair tied back. Her name tag said Mia. Richard looked up and was about to speak, but Ethan let out a soft cry, a sound that meant he was uncomfortable or in pain. His hands shook slightly, and his head tilted forward. Another tear fell down his cheek. Mia saw it. Before Richard could do anything, she gently leaned down, took a clean napkin from her pocket, and knelt beside Ethan. Double quotes, "Hey, sweet boy," she said softly, wiping the tears from his cheek. "It's okay. You're okay." She wasn't scared. She didn't look uncomfortable. She didn't hesitate. Richard froze. He watched her carefully. It had been years since anyone outside his family had touched Ethan without fear or awkwardness. Even trained nurses treated his son like a patient, not a child. But Mia didn't. She didn't ask permission. She didn't need instructions. She just knew. Her touch was kind, her tone calm. Ethan blinked. His fingers stopped shaking. He gave a small smile, a rare one. Richard felt something in his chest shift. He didn't even know what to call it. It wasn't love or attraction. It was surprise, shock, maybe even hope. He stood up and looked at Richard. "Would he like a milkshake?" she asked. "Strawberry's my favorite." Richard nodded slowly. Yes, strawberry would be nice. She smiled and left to place the order. Richard watched her walk away, then looked back at Ethan, who was now staring at the napkin Mia had used, still resting on his lap like a soft gift. Over the next 20 minutes, Richard noticed how Mia moved from table to table, smiling at everyone, refilling coffee without being asked, talking to an old man, like he was her grandfather, joking with 2 kids at a nearby booth. She wasn't just doing her job, she was connecting. Real connection. The kind that money couldn't buy. When she returned with the milkshake, she placed a straw near Ethan's lips and helped him drink carefully, holding the glass so it wouldn't spill. "There we go," she said, wiping a little drop of pink shake from Ethan's chin. "You're a champ." Ethan gave a soft giggle. It was the first sound of joy Richard had heard from him in weeks. "Thank you," Richard said quietly. "For that." Mia looked surprised. Oh, no problem. I have a younger brother. He needs help too, so I get it. Richard wanted to ask more, but he didn't. He didn't even know what to say. Instead, he sat there, quietly watching her. Help other customers, laughing now and then, moving like she had been doing this job forever. She didn't stop smiling, not even once. When it was time to leave, Richard stood up and placed a large tip under the plate. As he pushed Ethan's wheelchair toward the door, Mia waved. "Come back soon, okay?" she said to Ethan. Ethan gave. A small nod, another rare movement. Back in the car, Richard couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. How one stranger in just a few minutes had made his son smile, drink a milkshake, and feel safe. No therapy session had ever done that. No expert. No doctor. That night, he sat in his study, staring at the city lights outside the tall windows of his mansion. He couldn't focus on his work, couldn't answer emails. His mind kept replaying that moment, the way Mia wiped Ethan's tears, the way she smiled at him like he was just another kid. He picked up his phone and called his assistant. "There's a waitress at the Red Oak Diner named Mia," he said. "I want to know everything about her." The assistant was silent for a second. "Sir, you heard me." Richard didn't sleep much that night, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone, because somewhere out there, in a small diner full of old booths and greasy fries, a young woman had shown his son the kind of love that even a billionaire couldn't buy. The next day, he went back to the diner, and again the day after that, and every time Mia was there with. The same smile, the same soft voice, and the same magic that made Ethan feel like the world wasn't such a difficult place after all. Richard didn't know it yet, but his life and Mia's was about to change forever. All because of a napkin, a milkshake, and one stranger who saw tears and chose to care. The following week passed slowly for Richard Langston, though for the first time in many years, he was not thinking about business. His board members were sending him reports. His phone kept buzzing with offers and meeting requests, but none of it felt urgent anymore. His thoughts kept drifting back to that small diner, the girl with the gentle voice, and the way his son had smiled. Richard had visited the diner 2 more times that week. He always sat at the same table by the window. Each time, Mia greeted them with the same warm smile and soft words. She remembered that Ethan liked strawberry milkshakes and that he responded well to soft background music. She never looked at Ethan with pity. She looked at him like he was someone worth knowing. And Ethan, for reasons Richard couldn't explain, had started to react in ways he hadn't before. He made more eye contact. He smiled a little more. Once, he even tried to reach for Mia's hand. It was subtle, but to a father who had seen nothing but silence and sadness for years. These were miracles. Richard wasn't a man who believed in signs. He had built his fortune through numbers, strategy, and discipline. But something about Mia's presence stirred something deep inside him. It felt like meeting someone who saw the world differently, someone who didn't need power or money to change lives. One morning, after returning home from the diner, Richard asked his assistant to sit down. He was holding a small manila folder. In his hand, "This is Mia," Richard said, placing the folder on the table. "I asked you to find out about her. Tell me everything." His assistant, Greg, adjusted his glasses and opened the file. "Her full name is Mia Thompson. She's 22. Grew up in a small town 2 hours away from here. Her parents died in a car accident when she was 17. She has a younger brother named Leo. He's 15 and has Down syndrome." His legal guardian. Richard leaned forward, listening carefully. "She works 2 jobs," Greg continued. "This diner in the mornings, and she cleans offices at night. She never went to college, couldn't afford it. She's trying to save money for Leo's special education program. She has no criminal record, no debts, lives in a 1-bedroom apartment in the Lower East Side, that's all." Richard said nothing for a long moment. Then quietly he asked, "Does she have any idea who I am?" Greg shook his head. "Doesn't seem like it. She probably thinks you're just a regular customer." Richard leaned back in his chair, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Admiration. Real admiration. Not the kind people pretended to give him because of his money. but the kind you feel when someone is quietly fighting a battle every single day and still chooses to smile. Later that afternoon, Richard visited the diner again, but this time he went alone. Ethan was at a therapy session. The diner was busy, filled with the sounds of clinking dishes and light chatter. Mia was working as usual, her hair pulled back, moving from table to table with grace. When she noticed Richard sitting alone, she looked surprised but happy. "No Ethan today?" she asked, pouring him a glass of water. "He's at therapy," Richard replied. "I thought I'd come by anyway." Mia smiled and nodded. "It's nice to see you. He's such a sweet boy." Richard looked at her, really looked at her. Her eyes had that same calmness, the kind that came from someone who had been through storms and survived. "Mia," he said gently, "would you ever consider working with Ethan as a part-time caregiver?" Mia blinked, caught off guard. "Me, yes." Richard said, "You seem to understand him. He responds to you. And frankly, you have a gift. I've seen a lot of professionals fail to connect with him. But you, he smiles when he sees you." Mia looked nervous. I don't know. I mean, I've taken care of Leo my whole life, but I'm not a nurse. I've never done anything like that professionally." "I'm not asking for a professional," Richard said. "I'm asking for someone who truly cares." Mia hesitated. She thought about her schedule, her rent, her brother's school, and the hours she already worked. But then she thought about Ethan's eyes, his soft laugh, the way he had looked up at her like he trusted her. "I'd have to make sure it works around my other job," she said carefully. Richard nodded. "Of course, we'll work with your schedule. I'll have a driver pick you up. I'll pay you whatever you're earning in both jobs combined." Mia's eyes widened. "That's too much, it's not," he interrupted softly. "Worth more than you think." And so it began. Mia started visiting Richard's home 3 afternoons a week. She was surprised the first time she walked into his mansion. It was massive, with tall windows, a grand staircase, and walls filled with expensive art. But the house felt cold, not in temperature, but in feeling. It felt like a place where smiles were rare and laughter had been forgotten. Ethan's room, however, was different. It had a soft blue wall, toys neatly arranged, a shelf of children's books, and a large window overlooking a garden. Mia made herself comfortable quickly. She talked to Ethan like he was her own little brother. She brought music for him, told him funny stories, and even made him a small painting to hang in his room. Richard watched quietly from a distance, sometimes from the hallway, sometimes through the security camera on his phone. He saw Ethan laugh more. He heard Mia humming softly as she helped him eat or read him a book. He saw the way she patiently waited when Ethan struggled with something, never rushing him, never making him feel small. One evening, as Mia was helping Ethan with a puzzle, Richard walked into the room with a cup of tea. "You're very good with him," he said. Mia looked up and smiled. "He's very sweet. He just needs time." Richard sat down across from her, something he hadn't done with any caregiver before. "Can I ask you something?" He said. "Sure," Mia replied. "Why are you always so and even when things are hard?" Mia paused. Then she looked at Ethan, who was placing a puzzle piece with full concentration. "My brother taught me that," she said softly. "After our parents died, everyone told me I should put him in a care facility, that I was too young to take care of him. But I couldn't do that. He's my family. He needs someone who sees him, not just his condition." Richard nodded slowly, understanding more than he expected. "And you?" Mia asked. "Do you ever get tired?" "Every day," Richard said honestly. "But I can't stop, is all. I have left." That simple conversation changed something between them. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't dramatic. It was just real. Two people from different worlds, sitting together on the floor of a child's room, connected by the same kind of love. As the weeks passed, Mia became more than just a caregiver. She became a friend to Ethan and, unknowingly, a light in Richard's life. She brought color back into the mansion. She brought laughter. Sometimes she brought Leo too, and the boys would sit together, watching cartoons. Ethan laughing with his eyes and Leo talking nonstop with cheerful energy, Richard began to smile more. He stayed home more. He started reading books to Ethan. At night, something he had stopped doing years ago, but he still kept one thing hidden from Mia, his true identity. She had no idea he was one of the richest men in the country. To her, he was just Ethan's dad. Richard didn't want that to change. He liked being seen as human for once. Then one afternoon, after Mia had left, Richard sat alone in his study. He looked around the giant room filled with awards, leather books, and gold-framed certificates. But all he could think about was a waitress with paint on her fingers and a kind heart. He whispered to himself, "She's changed everything." And she had. Without knowing it, Mia had walked into a billionaire's life and done what money never could. She brought hope. She brought healing, and the story was just beginning. The autumn sun was shining gently over the city when Mia stepped off the train. Holding a small lunchbox and a coloring book for Ethan, she was used to her new routine now, 3 afternoons a week at Mr. Langston's house. Every time she walked, through the tall black gates and past the garden lined with roses and trimmed hedges, it still felt like a dream. But inside those tall mansion walls, everything felt real, especially the quiet moments with Ethan and the calm kindness Richard had started to show. Mia had never known anyone like Richard Langston. She had no idea about his billionaire status. To her, he was a quiet, serious man who loved his son deeply. She had noticed how his shoulders always seemed heavy, how his eyes sometimes looked far away, lost in thoughts he didn't share. But slowly, ever since she started spending time with Ethan, Richard had started opening up a little. He no longer stayed in his office all day. Now he often joined them in the evenings. Sometimes he read books to Ethan. Sometimes he just sat quietly, watching his son smile at Mia's silly jokes. One day, as Mia helped Ethan with his hand movements while drawing, she looked up and noticed Richard watching from the doorway. He wasn't saying anything, just smiling gently. "You should come help," she said, smiling back at him. "I can't draw." Richard replied. "Neither can I," she laughed, "but that's not the point. It's about trying." Richard chuckled and walked into the room. He sat beside Ethan and picked up a crayon. The three of them spent the next hour drawing strange animals, stick people, and wobbly houses. Richard hadn't done anything like that in years. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about numbers, deals, or business calls. He was just a dad, coloring with his son and a kind young woman who had slowly become the center of his quiet world. That evening, as Mia was leaving, Richard walked her to the door. "You've changed this house," he said softly. Mia turned to him, a little surprised. "What do you mean? It used to be very quiet, very cold. Now it's warmer." Brighter. Mia smiled but said nothing. Deep inside, she knew what he meant. She had felt it too. Something about this place had started to feel like home, not because of the size or the beauty of it, but because of the people in it. Days turned into weeks, and then into months. By now, Richard trusted Mia with almost everything related to Ethan. She would arrive even when it rained heavily, or when she was tired from cleaning offices all night. She always brought something new, a toy, a story, a song. Ethan was growing more comfortable. He was still disabled, still unable to walk or speak clearly, but his eyes had a new brightness. His face had started to glow with emotion. One rainy afternoon, Richard called Mia into his study after Ethan had fallen asleep. She stepped inside, holding a warm cup of tea he had offered her. "I need your advice," Richard said, standing. Near the window, Mia looked at him, curious. "Mine? Yes. You see, I've been offered a position overseas. A major business opportunity. I'd have to move to London for 2 years. I could take Ethan, of course, but it would change everything," Mia said softly. Richard nodded. "Exactly. He finally seems happy, comfortable, for the first time in years." Mia looked down, stirring her tea slowly. "Do you want to take it?" Richard hesitated. Then he looked at her and said, "I'm not sure. My whole life has been about business. Now, it's different. I don't want to chase money anymore. I want to stay where my son is happy." There was a pause. Then Mia said something Richard didn't expect. Maybe the real opportunity isn't out there. Maybe it's right here. Her words stayed with him that night. They rang in his ears like music he couldn't turn off. All his life, Richard had chased success, thinking money could solve everything. But now he realized that the most important thing's the smile of his son. The peace in his home, the laughter Mia brought, had nothing to do with money. Over the next few days, Richard decided to turn down the offer in London. He didn't make a big announcement. He simply chose to stay, Mia noticed. She could feel it in his calmness, the way he seemed lighter, like he had made peace with something. One evening, something unexpected happened. Mia had brought her brother Leo over to play with Ethan, as she sometimes did. The boys were sitting on the floor watching cartoons, when Leo suddenly turned to Richard. "Are you famous or something?" he asked, completely out of the blue. Richard blinked. "Why do you ask? Your house is huge," Leo said. "There's a big picture of you in a magazine I saw once. My teacher had it." Mia's face froze. She looked at Richard, confused. "What is he talking about?" Richard sighed quietly. He stood up and walked to a drawer, pulling out an old magazine. He handed it to her. On the cover was his face, smiling in a business suit. With bold letters, Richard Langston, the billionaire mind behind the empire. Mia stared at it, speechless. She looked up at him. "You're him." "Yes," Richard said simply. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want that to change the way you treated me. Or Ethan." Mia stepped back. "All this time, I thought you were just a dad," he finished for her. "I am. Everything else is just noise." Mia didn't say anything for a long time. She felt like the ground under her feet had shifted. She thought about all the times she had joked with him, shared her life stories, told him her struggles without any filter. Had she said too much? Had she been foolish? But then Richard said something she didn't expect. "I've never been more myself with anyone than I am with you. You never looked at me like a title. You looked at me like a person. That's rare." In my world, Mia's eyes softened. She sat down slowly, still holding the magazine. "I don't care about the money, Richard. I care about Ethan, and I care about what we've built here." Richard smiled. "That's exactly why I trust you more than anyone." The conversation ended there, but it changed everything between them. From that day forward, there was a new honesty between them. No secrets, no walls. Richard started involving Mia in more of Ethan's life. Decisions, doctors, therapists, even personal plans for education and care. And slowly, something deeper started to grow between them. Not fast, not dramatic. It's just a quiet, warm closeness. Like two people slowly learning to lean on each other without saying too much. One evening, as they sat on the back porch watching Ethan and Leo play with building blocks, Richard looked at Mia and said, "You know, for someone who started as a waitress, you've become the most important person in our lives." Mia blushed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Funny how life works, isn't it?" "Yes," Richard said softly. "Funny and beautiful." As the sun went down and the garden lights came on, Ethan clapped his hands in excitement. Mia and Richard watched him, their hearts full. Neither of them said what they were truly feeling, but they didn't need to. In that quiet moment, they both knew something special had begun. And though neither of them said it out loud, one thing was clear: life would never be the same again. The days had started to pass more gently now. The mansion, once a lonely and silent place, had slowly become a warm home filled with soft laughter. The sound of children playing and quiet conversations that felt like music. Richard often found himself standing by the doorway just watching Ethan giggle when Mia made funny faces. Watching Mia braid Ethan's hair or sing to him while feeding him dinner, and sometimes watching her talk to Leo like he was her own son. Everything was softer now. The world outside still chased after money, power, and fast success. But inside these walls, something much more valuable had been found: peace. It had been nearly 7 months since Mia had first wiped Ethan's tears in that small diner. And now, she was here almost every day. Not just as a helper, not just as a friend, but as someone who had become like family. And while no one had officially said it, the bond between her and Richard had grown deeper. There was trust, care, and something more, something delicate and unspoken, something that didn't need labels to feel real. One cold December morning, Mia arrived at the mansion earlier than usual. Snowflakes floated gently through the air, and the trees in the garden were covered in white. She had brought small gifts for both Ethan and Leo, handmade scarves with their names stitched on the edges. When she entered, the house smelled of cinnamon and vanilla. Richard had asked the staff to decorate for Christmas, and now the large tree in the living room was glowing with soft yellow lights and silver ornaments. Ethan was in the sunroom, wrapped in a blanket, watching the snow through the window. When Mia walked in, his eyes lit up, and he made a soft sound that sounded like a mix between a laugh and a hum. Mia kissed his forehead and held out the scarf. "Merry early Christmas," she whispered. Richard walked in a few minutes later, holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate, one for him and one for Mia. Their fingers brushed as he handed it to her, and neither of them pulled away quickly. "Thank you," Mia said, her voice quiet. "You've done more for us than I could ever repay," Richard replied. They sat beside Ethan for a long time without speaking. The snow kept falling outside and inside. It felt like the world had stopped rushing. Later that evening, Richard invited Mia and Leo to stay for dinner. The table was filled with warm food, and the 4 of them laughed over silly stories Leo told about his school. For the first time in a long time, Richard smiled without forcing it. He didn't think about his business. He didn't check his phone. He just looked around the table and felt something fill the emptiness in his chest. After dinner, as Leo and Ethan watched cartoons in the living room, Richard and Mia stepped out onto the back porch. The snow had stopped, and the stars were scattered across the sky like tiny lanterns. "I used to think I'd never see my son happy again," Richard said quietly. "And now," he asked, "now I see him smile every day, because of you." Mia looked down, unsure of what to say. "I never told you this," Richard continued, "but there was a time when I thought about giving up." Mia turned to him, shocked. "What do you mean, after the accident?" "After Ethan's condition worsened and my wife left us, I felt like everything I worked for meant nothing. I had money but no joy, a big house but no warmth. People respected me, but I didn't respect myself. I kept going for Ethan's sake, but I was drowning." Mia reached out and gently touched his hand. "You didn't give up," she whispered. "You kept fighting for him. That matters." Richard looked into her eyes, the cold air around them forgotten. "You came into our lives at the exact moment we needed you most." Mia's eyes began to shine, not from the cold, but from emotion. "I didn't do anything special," she said. "I just cared." "That," Richard said, "is the most special thing anyone's ever done for us." There was a silence between them, but it wasn't awkward. It was full of unspoken words and feelings neither of them had yet named. Then, just before they turned to go back inside, Richard gently said, "I don't know what the future holds, but I do know one thing. Wherever Ethan is, I want you there too." Mia smiled. It was soft, full of feeling, and without hesitation. "I'm not going anywhere." In the days that followed, Richard began doing things he hadn't done in years. He cooked breakfast with Leo while Mia helped Ethan with his morning routines. He joined Mia in small tasks like decorating Ethan's room, choosing music for therapy, or reading bedtime stories. One morning, he even went to the diner Mia used to work at. The manager recognized him immediately and asked if everything was okay. Richard smiled and said, "I just wanted to see where one of the kindest people I've ever met came from." Later, that week, something else happened, something that brought Mia even deeper into their lives. Richard received a call from Ethan's specialist. The doctor told him that Ethan's brain scans showed slight but promising improvement. His responses to therapy had become better. The calm environment, consistent love, and emotional connection were making a real difference. The doctor even said, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. It's working." Richard hung up and immediately called Mia to meet him in the garden. When she arrived, he couldn't hide the joy in his face. "You're not going to believe this," he said, his eyes shining. Ethan is improving, not dramatically, but enough to give us real hope. Mia's hand went to her mouth. She almost cried. I knew he was smiling more, she whispered. But this is beautiful. Richard nodded. It's you, Mia. You've changed his world. Mia hugged him without thinking, without hesitation. It was natural, filled with emotion, not words. Richard hugged her back, and in that moment, everything between them became clear. Later that night, as they sat together watching the fireplace, Richard turned to her and said, Mia, I don't just want you in Ethan's life. I want you in mine. Mia looked at him, surprised but not shocked. Somewhere deep in her heart she had felt this growing. The closeness, the understanding. The way he looked at her, not just as someone who helped his son, but someone who made his own heart feel alive again. I'm scared, she admitted softly. Not because I don't care, but because this feels so big. So is love, Richard said gently, but it's worth it. Mia didn't answer with words. She just held his hand, and in that moment, that was more powerful than anything she could have said. The next morning, everything felt different, but in a good way. Ethan woke up with a soft smile. Leo played in the hallway, pretending to be a superhero. And Mia and Richard stood in the kitchen, quietly preparing breakfast together. Like a couple who had been doing this for years. They weren't in a rush. They didn't need to name what was growing between them. They just knew it was real. That night, as they sat around the table again, the four of them eating warm soup and bread, Mia looked at Richard and said, You know, this feels like a family. Richard smiled, the deepest smile she'd ever seen from him. That's because it is. Outside, the snow started falling again. Soft, quiet, peaceful, and inside the house, for hearts once broken, once alone, beat together in warmth, love, and hope. A new beginning had truly begun. The winter passed slowly, with days full of small moments that felt precious and new. Ethan continued to show signs of improvement, and the house was filled with a warmth that had once seemed impossible. Mia, Richard, Leo, and Ethan had become a true family, bound not by blood, but by care, love, and shared hope. This last part of the story is about how their lives changed forever. Not just because of money or success, but because of kindness, trust, the courage to open their hearts. It all started on a quiet morning when Richard woke early and looked out the window. The garden was covered in frost, shining under the soft morning sun. The first time in years he felt peace. Not just because the business was stable or because Ethan's condition was improving, but because his life finally felt whole. He had spent so long running away from pain. Pain from his wife leaving. Pain from feeling helpless for Ethan, and pain from his own loneliness. But now, he was learning that healing came not from what he could buy or control, but from the people around him. That morning, he made a decision that would change everything. He wanted to give Mia something special, a way to show how much she meant to him and his family. Mia arrived later that day, as usual, bringing laughter and light into the house. She found Richard in the study, holding a small box wrapped in silver paper. I have something for you, he said, his voice soft but steady. Mia looked surprised. For me? Yes, for all you've done. For all you are. She carefully opened the box. Inside was a simple silver locket, shining in the light. Richard took it out and held it in his hand. This belonged to my mother, he said quietly. She gave it to me when I was a child. It's always been a symbol of hope and love in our family. I want you to have it. Mia's eyes filled with tears. She couldn't speak at first. The locket was beautiful, but what it really meant was far greater. Thank you, Richard, she whispered. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, he replied. Just wear it and know you're part of this family. From that day on, Mia wore the locket every day. It reminded her that she was loved, trusted, and valued. As winter gave way to spring, the family continued to grow closer. Leo learned to ride his bike, with Richard cheering him on every day. Ethan's therapy sessions brought new progress. Mia often stayed late to help with his exercises. One afternoon, Richard invited Mia to a business meeting. It was the first time he had asked her to join him in the office. She was nervous, but excited when they arrived. The room was full of suits and serious faces. But Richard introduced Mia with pride. "This is Mia," he said. "She's been my son's greatest helper and my greatest friend. She's part of our family." The meeting ended with warm smiles and handshakes. Mia felt proud not because of the business world, but because Richard had accepted her fully that night. As they walked home, Richard held Mia's hand. The city lights glittered around them. "I never thought I'd find someone like you," he said softly. "Someone who sees beyond the surface and cares about what really matters." Mia smiled. Neither did I. Their relationship wasn't perfect. There were hard days, worries about the future, and moments of doubt. But they faced everything together, learning that love wasn't about never falling. It was about rising again and again. One day, Richard surprised Mia with a trip to a quiet lakeside cabin. It was simple, but perfect. They spent the weekend, talking, laughing, and dreaming about the future. "I want to build a life with you," Richard said one evening, watching the sun set over the water. Mia looked at him, heart pounding. "I want that too." They didn't rush to say more. They just held each other, feeling the promise of a new beginning. Back at the mansion, the boys were growing up surrounded by love. Ethan's smile was brighter than ever, and Leo had learned to be a gentle, protective big brother. One afternoon, as Mia helped Ethan with a puzzle, she noticed Richard watching them with a soft smile. "You've changed all of us," he said quietly. Mia shook her head. "No, we changed each other." As time went on, Richard decided to give back in ways he never had before. Inspired by Mia's humble beginnings and endless kindness, he started a foundation to help disabled children and families who couldn't afford proper care. Mia became the heart of that foundation, organizing events, meeting families, and making sure every child received the love and support they deserved. Together, they created a ripple of hope that reached far beyond their home. One day, during a charity event, a young girl approached Mia with tears in her eyes. She looked just like Ethan when he was younger, scared and uncertain. Mia knelt down, wiped the girl's tears, and smiled in that moment. She remembered the day Richard had watched her do the same for his son in the diner. How a simple act of kindness had changed their lives forever. Life was never easy. There were struggles, fears, and moments of sadness. But Mia, Richard, Ethan, and Leo had learned the power of love, how it could heal, strengthen, and transform. Their story was not about wealth or status, but about human connection. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest actions could change the world. And for Mia and Richard, it was only the beginning of a beautiful journey, one filled with hope, family, and endless love.